Okay, so I guess it's my job now to cheer you up. I'll try and do that, but I can't refrain from using the mic that I have at this moment to respond a bit to Batya's a very grim description of the situation vis-a-vis the framework that was introduced here. And I think maybe, and Tziona is also here, and we will both be talking about possible collaboration between the school system, the educational school system, and the academia, and seeing it as, part of the same system. So perhaps this is the point where we are, experiencing these huge gaps and thinking of the dilemmas where if we start and graduates of the system end with better state of affairs in terms of their vocabulary knowledge, maybe the starting point will be different. That's one thing. The other thing is if English for academic purposes undergoes a certain transition, is taught differently, using the different skills, using them for academic purposes, but not detached from the subject matter. I'm also talking about English medium instruction. Perhaps there lies the hope that these gaps will, if they might not be closed, but I think we need to relate to teaching hours outside the special courses geared for EAP, that meaning also going back to the first presentation where engineering is taught in English and some language acquisition takes place while subject matter or content acquisition. But I guess we'll go back to these things when we talk in the panel discussion. So I'll talk a bit about the whole dilemma of international versus local standards. And I think there is a built-in paradox, and Ilana and Lisa alluded to it somewhat. On one hand, there's a quest for uniformity. We want to adopt the CFR. We want to use the same terminology as other contexts are using. We want to align with the CFR and with the international standards. And on the other hand, there is this whole issue of uniqueness. How do we retain our unique features within each one of the countries that is using the CFR? So basically, the problem that I'd like to pose is whether internationalization and localization, it's difficult just to say these words, are at all achievable. Is this something that we can actually aspire to? And I found, looking through the internet, I didn't get to the wonderful TED presentation, in a journal called University World News from March 2014 that reported on the national or international quality standards of both from a meeting of the Council of Higher Education Accreditation International Quality Group held in Washington, D.C. And one of the key sentences that struck me as relevant to us was the following: there was some consensus around developing global standards that are able to articulate with strong national quality systems. And there is obviously a presupposition here that there is a strong local quality, that there are strong local quality measures or standards available locally. And then we can hope for such a merge. That brings across this very, very worthwhile challenge of whether we can produce a single set of standards, one that comprises of both international standards and local ones. And they go on to say that the development of international quality systems, such as in Europe and Asia, provided hope that global standards had the potential to support quality in higher education. However, a single set of standards would require unanimity and consensus, would need to recognize the uniqueness of different countries and institutions. So there is overall consensus of the fact that there can be a situation whereby international standards and local standards reign or live together side by side peacefully. Wish I could say that about other things. But as I said, there are certain preconditions that need to be fulfilled. And the dilemma from our point of view, and I must say this also came up many a times when we were working on the CFR and trying to think of the local needs of our students here, the local contexts. And there is always the fear that once you belong to a wider community, if we adopt the CFR, we will be sort of swallowed up within the European context or the worldwide context and lose our uniqueness. And questions regarding the suitability of the standards to the local context in terms of cultural aspects, linguistic aspects, and also social issues. We have our own very special context, immigrant country, minorities, et cetera, and to what extent can we actually retain these specific aspects or cater to them once we abide by international standards. So I'd like here, surprise, surprise, to make a case for the common European framework of reference for language learning and teaching, nicknamed, we are very affectionate about this nickname, we call it the CFR, right, all over. And I'd like to make a case for the fact that it embodies or can actually fulfill that aspiration for the integration of global and local standards. And if you recognize the actor, do you know where this is from? Gregory Peck, yeah. They were good-looking men once, right? Gregory Peck for To Kill a Mockingbird, okay, he's making a case. So I'd like to make a case for, as I said, the CFR for the various levels. And I'd like to stress something that we often forget, and people also in the European context, and this is a good time to welcome all our European partners. Some conferences that I've been to in the European context that talk about the CFR only in terms, or mostly in terms of assessment. And I'd like us to keep in mind the fact that the CFR has a long introduction or devotes much of its content to issues related to learning and teaching and assessment, and to the role that students and teachers play within this framework. And this will enable us to really think about how the two frameworks go together. So I know this has been said before, but I just want to repeat it very shortly. What does a CFR include? It includes principles and rationale for language teaching, learning, and assessment in the different skills. It includes scales for evaluating language ability, those famous 6 levels. But it also includes, and this is what Lisa talked about before, can-do statements for self-assessment purposes. So there is a very strong emphasis on developing an autonomous learner who can go through the process of learning, set targets, and see if she have achieved it. And the beauty of it is it's applicable for language learning throughout. So you can make adjustments according to your needs. The principles are universal. I think there is agreement in terms of the language teaching and learning community as to how it is best now considered to learn languages. But it also represents human rights. It also represents awareness of one's identity based on shared values. So the CEFR framework based on the EU principles goes beyond just languages. What languages, we had this in the introductory talks by Rosalie and Ranan, the importance of language for setting identity, for cultural values, and for language learning as a means for preserving, as I said, linguistic cultural identity, improving communication, mutual understanding, and combating intolerance and xenophobia. And I think all of us share the view that this is very, very powerful and important. So when we talk about the universal and local language learning, teaching, and assessment, we want to talk about international communication and intensifying that aspect. but we also want to talk about situated language use for different purposes, and those were also mentioned before. Very important, again, I'd like to stress what's been said, that it's a descriptive, not a prescriptive framework, and says so outright. We have not set out to tell practitioners what to do or how to do it. We're raising questions, not answering them. That appears in the introduction. And Costa in 2007 says, the CFR is a context amendable system. And that's really important. It's not a top-down framework for us to use as being dictated, and the document produced and showed before actually illustrates that system. So we would like to see how this all fits into the bigger picture. And as I said, we are looking now into long-range planning using those same principles for the educational system going all the way up to the tertiary level. And I think that's big news for the Israeli English teaching community, but particularly for the students within that, that the English teaching community is teaching, for teachers within the school system and the tertiary level. So as I said, the principles are international, the approach international, implementation local, and I'd like just to illustrate it in a few minutes through one of the tools most associated with the CFR, which is the European Language Portfolio, the ELP. The ELP is a portfolio that is meant for assessment, but also for learning. And it reflects learning. It's a formative assessment tool. It's linked to the CFR and assesses learners can assess themselves in relation to the proficiency levels. It's identified as the property of the learner. It encourages learners to take responsibility for their learning, plan their learning, and monitor progress, helps to make progress visible, and helps make achievement visible both to learner and student, and of course facilitates mobility. David Little is most identified with the ELP, and once established, it hasn't changed since in the beginning of this millennium. It contains 3 components: My Language Passport, which is a self-assessment tool for language skills and qualifications; My Language Biography, how I can use the language, helps me to learn the language I need for school and things I do every day, helps me to think about where I can learn the language, how to learn it; and My Dossier, which is the component where you keep examples of your achievements in the language. This is all taken from one sample of the ELP, an Irish ELP meant for school children. And that's the beauty of the ELP, and that's how it illustrates so nicely the combination between the international and the local. Because you can use the ELP and you can adjust it for different audiences, different learner groups, purposes, and context. There is not a single ELP portfolio. There is a huge variety of different portfolios made for different languages and different target and age groups. Again, all these portfolios incorporate or follow the CEFR framework, not just in the technical sense of the can-dos, but also in the sense that they integrate teaching, assessment, and language learning. And you can look at it, you can start with the learning and the teaching, and the assessment goes in between. The order is not prescribed. So the ELP presents an option for international and local implementation, same yet different, but it's an ongoing cycle. And here is the examples from the Irish portfolio for school children, of course, adapted for their needs, but there are different emphases in a portfolio that was created for adult immigrants in Ireland. The same 3 components linked to the CFR, sees learning as an ongoing cycle with assessment intertwined, but is geared to their needs. And the question is, and I'm sure we'll be discussing this further, is how can the ELP be used in the Israeli context? Can the ELP be part of teaching EAP in tertiary academic settings? Meaning, can our framework that we introduced today be accompanied by such a tool which will help the learner and the teacher in the ways I described? And the question is, what local characteristics will it take? For different purposes? Are modifications required? What do teachers need to know in order to be able to use it? And here I go back to what I said before. If the presupposition for having an international and local framework or standards collaborate, the presupposition is that we need to have local quality measures, then we need to create strong local standards. And I think that's our great challenge. Creating a worthwhile local system, universal as unique as in the case of the CFR and its subcomponents like the ELP. So I'd like to, and of course the proposed ECHO framework is offering a balance between meeting these international standards and teaching and the local Israeli needs. However, I'm not going to be as grim, but I'm going to bring up pointers that we need to consider in order for all of this to happen harmoniously. For international quality standard and localized implementation to happen, these are essential requirements, and goes back to some of the questions that were asked before in the Malag framework. There has to be involvement of all key stakeholders, the ministry, the Council for Higher Education, the teachers, the principals, and the students. The students are an active participants in this process. It has to be a system-wide commitment open to the generic and unique within the local context. It has to be orchestrated and monitored in synchronization. Teachers have to undergo professional development as well and develop local experts and leaders. They are the local experts and leaders, but they have to undergo certain development, professional development, our professional development program that is being offered on international standards and their local implementation. So, are we ready for the challenge? Yes. Thank you.